Hello friends, I'm Professor John Gallagher and welcome to CircuitPython School, an introduction to CircuitPython for absolute beginners. In this lesson, I'll demonstrate how you can install or upgrade CircuitPython on a Raspberry Pi Pico board. I'm going to use a Pico 2W. The procedure is nearly identical for all Pico boards, and I'll point out the one area where it differs and what to look for. And just to make sure everything is working, we'll put a bit of code on the board to blink its onboard LED. And while this procedure is demonstrated using a Pico board, you'd do pretty much the same thing for other CircuitPython boards as well. So let's get started, maker. Now I'm going to perform this install on a Raspberry Pi Pico 2W board, but if you have a different board, know that Adafruit publishes a Learn Guide for each board, and you can find that Learn Guide by searching for Adafruit, Learn Guide, and the name of your board. The guide should have a CircuitPython section that gives specific information on how to install CircuitPython on your board. Now to follow along, my students will need any Raspberry Pi Pico board, a micro USB data cable. Be sure to get a data cable. Some cables are charge only, but you need a data cable to transfer data from your computer to your board. And that's it. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that our board is running the very latest version of CircuitPython. If you have a new board, these steps will put CircuitPython on the board, and if your board already has CircuitPython installed, these steps will make sure that you've upgraded to the latest version. So to do this, open a browser and head to circuitpython.org. Click Downloads, and you can use the search box to find the board you're looking for. I've entered Pico 2, and I'll select Pico 2W. Now it's important that you find and select the exact board that you want, because the files for the Pico aren't the same as the files for the Pico 2, and the W boards that support Wi-Fi have different files than the base boards. You'll see the version of CircuitPython listed on the page. Your browser is probably showing a number that's later than the one that's shown here. The open source team behind CircuitPython is always updating the language with new features and better stability, so just get the latest one listed. Click on the big purple Download UF2 Now button. This will download a file with a .uf2 extension at the end, and this file will let us put CircuitPython on our board. Now do note that the .uf2 file is specific to the type of board that you're working with. So my students used a Circuit Playground Bluefruit earlier in the semester, but they needed a different UF2 file for that board. After clicking Download, your browser might save this file to your Downloads folder. I have my browser configured to ask where I want to save this, so I'm going to save mine to the desktop. And we just downloaded a .uf2 file that we'll use to put CircuitPython on the board. And while we're here, let's download the latest libraries bundle. So the UF2 file that we're going to install provides the most basic version of CircuitPython for your board. It does a lot, but libraries allow us to extend our capabilities of the board so that it can work with hundreds of different types of hardware. These could be add-ons like NeoPixel lights, motors, sensors, or to work with networking like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. All that stuff isn't built into the base version of CircuitPython because it would take up too much room and it wouldn't fit on your board. So anytime you want to work with new hardware like NeoPixel lights or work with a specific sensor, then you'll probably need to add a library that's specific for that type of hardware. This will give the base CircuitPython language additional programming statements so that we can work with that stuff. Now it is possible to find and drag over any libraries you need, but my students are going to install and use a tool called CircUp to automatically install libraries that they need on their boards. It's a huge advantage. You should use it too, and I'll demonstrate how to install and use CircUp in a later video. So we're not going to need the library files for the libraries themselves, but you might want to download this anyway because the folder we're about to get also has hundreds of different example code files, and that can be very useful for your own learning. So let's find and click on the latest library folder, click the Libraries tab, and the libraries and example code are referred to as a bundle. And at the top of the page, you'll probably see bundles for the current and prior version of CircuitPython, so find the library bundle for the version you just downloaded, and click its large purple button. Again, your browser will either ask you where you want to save this, or it'll save it to the Downloads folder. I'm saving mine to the desktop. And now let's minimize the browser and get CircuitPython on your board. My UF2 file is saved to the desktop. You might need to open your Downloads file to find yours. And now let's set up the Pico so that it can accept the UF2 file that we just downloaded. To do this, plug your USB cable into your computer, and it's very important to make sure that you're using a data cable. Many cables are charge only, so if for some reason your board isn't showing up on your computer in the way that I'm about to demonstrate, you might be using the wrong cable. Then on your Pico board, find the button labeled Boot Cell, S-E-L. If you hold your board with the USB port to the right, it's probably just to the left of the USB port. Then hold down the Boot Cell button while you plug your USB cable into your Pico, and keep holding down Boot Cell until you see a volume mounted on your computer that begins with RP. For Pico boards, it'll probably say something like RPI-RP2. For Pico 2 boards, it'll probably say RP2350. I'm using a Pico 2W here, so you can see RP2350 just appeared on my desktop, and once you see that, you can let go of your Boot Cell button. So when the Pico board is mounted with a name beginning with RP, it's in what we call bootloader mode. This just means it's ready to be upgraded to the latest version of CircuitPython by having the UF2 file dragged onto it. Now, if for some reason your board doesn't show up with a volume named RP, and instead it says CircuitPy, then it's not in bootloader mode. Just repeat the previous steps until you see a volume mounted that begins with RP. You don't want to do the steps that I'm about to show you if it says CircuitPy. That's not in bootloader mode, and that won't accept the upgrade files that we're about to install. But if your board is showing up like mine with a volume beginning with RP, then just click and drag the UF2 file and release it on top of your RP volume. That'll copy the UF2 over to your board. It might take a few seconds, then the RP board will be dismounted and disappear from your desktop. But in a second or two, a new volume will be mounted called CircuitPy, all uppercase letters, and when you see that, congratulations! You've just installed or upgraded your Pico to the latest version of CircuitPython. Well done! Now let's double-click the CircuitPy volume to see what's on our board, and we see a file called code.py in here. This is going to be the name of any CircuitPython program that we save to the board, and code.py is going to be run automatically every time the board is first powered up, whenever the board is reset, or whenever there's ever any file activity on the board. That means if you save any changes to code.py, your code will rerun. It'll also rerun if you drag any new files over to the board, if you move files around on the board, or if you delete anything from the board. Now, if you're using a new board, it's probably got just a single line of code in here that prints the phrase, "Hello World." We'll erase that in just a bit. Now, the lib folder holds any libraries you have installed. I don't have anything in here because this is a brand new board. Now, for my students, if you're reusing a board that was used the previous semester, there might already be some library files in here. You might even have some additional folders with things like sounds on them. If you have any extra files, you can feel free to throw those away right now. Now, this boot_out.txt file is useful if you're ever wondering what version of CircuitPython's on the board. So if you just double-click it, you can see it opens this basic text file. It tells me the CircuitPython version and the board that I'm using. So I'll quit out of this file, and let me show you what's in that library bundle that we downloaded. So remember, the library bundle that we downloaded is in a folder that begins Adafruit-CircuitPython-bundle, and if you open this folder up, you'll see a lib folder. This contains the latest version of all the libraries for all the hardware you can use with CircuitPython. Now, it's way too big to install on a board all at once, so that's why I've got to install libraries pretty much one by one when you need them. Now, you can drag any individual library or folder over to your lib folder on your CircuitPy volume, but we're going to use the circup program for that. That'll be in our next lesson. Now, I'd also mention this examples folder. It's loaded with hundreds of example programs showing basic code supporting all kinds of hardware. Now, most of the names aren't going to be familiar to you, but if you ever use any new hardware, you can search here to see if it's got, say, the name of a sensor or a type of motor, and there should be some example code that you can explore to learn how things work. Now, I'm going to close all this up for now, and let's put some code on our board so we can get the Pico's LED light flashing just to make sure everything's working okay. Now, in a later lesson, we're going to install another program we'll use to edit our Python code, but for now, we'll just use a browser-based program. So now open a browser. Unfortunately, we can't use Safari for this. I prefer Safari because it's less of a resource hog than Chrome, but you need a Chromium-based browser to use the website we're about to use. Most of you probably have Chrome, and with Chrome open, head to code.circuitpython.org. Now you'll be asked how you're connecting with your board. We're connecting via USB, so click that. Then to connect the device that's attached to USB, click on Connect to Device. And I can see mine showing up here. It says Pico 2W, so I'll click that and click Connect, and the snake swirls, and we see that we need to select the root folder for our device. So this is usually the CircuitPy volume, all caps. So click on Select New Folder, then navigate to your CircuitPy volume. That should show up wherever your USB drives are listed. Select it, then click the Select button, and then when asked if you should let the site edit files, click Edit Files, and then I'm going to close this window, and let's grab some simple code to blink the onboard LED on the Pico. So let's open a new tab, enter this URL, bit.ly/cp for CircuitPython, -blink. This brings up this code on GitHub. We won't worry about understanding the code right now. Just know that it continually flashes the LED light on and off every half second. So I'm going to highlight all of this code, copy it, head back to the other tab that has the code editor, paste it into the code editor, and there's a Save and Run button in the upper right-hand corner, so click on this. Now the code that executes on our board should be named code.py, so I'll click on that file, then click on Save. We're asked if we want to overwrite the existing code.py. We do, so click OK. And it might take about 5 seconds for your code to execute, but we can see the results over here on the right-hand side. So it looks like for some reason the code ran and then stopped and then ran again. And I know that because I can see 2 sets of these messages that were printed out. So I'm highlighting here where it says, CircuitPython is awesome. And below that it says, look at your board, the LED light should be blinking. And there are 2 lines over here in this code that print those 2 messages. But if we take a look at our Pico board, hey, the LED light is indeed blinking. The code is working. We've installed CircuitPython on the board. Nice work. So here's a quick recap of the steps to install or upgrade CircuitPython. You can use this as a crib sheet. Visit circuitpython.org, click on download, and find and download the UF2 file for your specific board. Then we mount the board in what's called bootloader mode, which you can think of as CircuitPython upgrade mode. For a Pico board, that involves holding down the boot cell button and plugging the board into your computer via USB. And once you see the board mounted with a name that begins with RP, you can let go of boot cell. You're now in bootloader mode, ready to install CircuitPython. And remember, the way that you get into bootloader mode and the name of the board when it's mounted in bootloader mode will vary by boards. So if you're not using a Pico board, consult your Adafruit Learn Guide for that board. Then you just drag your UF2 file over to the board that's mounted in bootloader mode. That will dismount, and the board will remount with the name CircuitPy, and you're now ready for CircuitPython work. And from this point forward, anytime you plug in your upgraded board, it should show up as CircuitPy. And pro tip, you should never see a UF2 file inside your board when it's in CircuitPy mode. If you see a UF2 in there, just delete it. It's just taking up space. I hope you found this lesson worthwhile, and if you did, let me know, and prepare for new lessons where we'll learn to make something awesome.